What happens when a man with enough money to buy the world decides he wants to own a piece of paradise? We've all seen this story play out, haven't we? A billionaire, Conrad Raines, descends on a remote, pristine island with grand plans for a luxury resort. He promises progress, but the locals fear he'll just pave over their culture and their ecosystem. It's the age-old battle, nature versus profit. And rising against him is a fierce, brilliant environmental scientist, Dr. Liana Cruz, a woman ready to fight to the death for her home. It seems like a clear-cut story of good versus evil, a classic eco-activist versus tycoon showdown. But I'm here to tell you that everything you think you know about this fight is completely wrong. Here is a powerful belief that changes everything. The most brutal wars are not fought on public battlefields, but within our own bloodlines. What if your greatest adversary, the one person standing between you and your ambition, was a part of yourself you never knew existed? In a world that tells you to crush your enemies, here is a counterintuitive truth. The most powerful move is often to discover your connection to them. We're about to pull back the curtain on the ultimate DN, a twist revelation. Because the scientist fighting to stop this billionaire is his billionaire's secret daughter. And the craziest part? Neither of them knows it yet. This story is a roller coaster of guilt, love, and redemption that will leave you absolutely breathless. Before we get into how a chance photograph and a monster hurricane exposed a secret that was buried for decades, make sure you're following the channel so you never miss stories that are almost too incredible to be true. Go ahead and share this video with a friend who needs to see it to believe it. And drop a comment below letting us know what city or country you're watching from today. Here we go. Imagine a scene so quiet you can almost hear the sun touching the sand. Suddenly, the sky tears open with the sound of a private helicopter. That's how a man like Conrad Raines eravescent by boat, but by descending from the heavens like a modern-day god, ready to reshape the world to his liking. He steps onto the pristine beach, the wind whipping at his tailored suit, a stark contrast to the untouched nature around him. You know, it's funny how a single person's arrival can feel like an invasion, a silent declaration that things are about to change forever. This wasn't just a visit, it was the beginning of a father versus daughter battle that no one saw coming. Conrad isn't your typical run-off-the-mill billionaire. Nah, he's cut from a different cloth. He's the kind of man who sees spreadsheets in sunsets and profit margins in pristine coral reefs. His mind is a fortress, built brick by brick with ambition and a relentless drive that left little room for much else. He believes progress is the only path forward, a stark philosophy that would inevitably lead to a clash of nature versus profit. He carries an air of old money and new power, but beneath it all, there's a flicker of something else, a deep-seated guilt that he papers over with blueprints and billion-dollar deals. At a hastily assembled town hall, with the scent of salt and skepticism in the air, he unveiled his grand vision. Picture this: slick architectural renderings of infinity pools bleeding into the horizon, overwater bungalows promising unparalleled luxury. He sold it as a golden ticket, a promise of jobs and prosperity. Yet, for some, his words felt like a gilded cage, threatening to trap the soul of their home. The project was designed to be a paradise, but it was already beginning to feel like a resort sparks family war, planting the seeds for a conflict rooted in unknown blood ties. You see, a man with that much power doesn't just build a resort, he builds a legacy. But what kind of legacy was he truly after? It's a bit like those people who climb Mount Everest. Are they doing it for the love of the climb or for the bragging rights at the top? For Conrad, this project wasn't just about money. It was about filling a void, a gaping hole left in his past decades ago on this very same stretch of land. He was unknowingly setting the stage for an island love reborn, though the love he'd find wouldn't be what he expected. The islanders listened, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. They'd seen men like him before, Men with silver tongues who promised the world and left behind only scars. The air grew thick with unspoken questions, a quiet resistance brewing beneath the surface politeness. It was the calm before the storm, the first chapter in a story of environmental justice versus unchecked ambition. Little did anyone know, the unveiling of these plans was also the start of island secrets unveiled, secrets that would change everything. His speech ended, but the real story was just beginning. Conrad stood there, a titan of industry on a tiny speck of paradise, completely oblivious to the fact that his greatest challenge wasn't going to come from the local government or environmental groups. No, his true adversary was already on the island, a force of nature he couldn't control, tied to him by a past he thought he had buried. The stage was set for an epic confrontation, a D&A-twist revelation waiting in the wings to shatter his perfectly constructed world. Of course, the first thing a man like Conrad offers is a golden carrot jobs. It's the oldest trick in the book, isn't it? Dangle the promise of a steady paycheck in front of people who have little, and you can make them believe. In almost any dream, he painted a beautiful picture of prosperity, of a future where no one had to leave the island to find work. Hope is a powerful currency, my friend, and Conrad was spending it lavishly. But this glittering promise was the very heart of the nature vs profit dilemma, forcing people to weigh their immediate needs against a cost they couldn't yet calculate. But here's the thing about a paradise like this one: it's fragile. You can't just bulldoze a mangrove forest, which acts as the island's nursery for countless marine species, and not expect the whole system to collapse. Think of it as a house of cards. Remove one, and the whole thing shudders. The proposed resort site was a critical nesting ground for sea turtles, and the runoff from construction threatened to choke the vibrant coral reefs. It was a classic scenario where the foundation of progress would be built on blood in the sand, the lifeblood of an ecosystem bleeding out for the sake of luxury. And what about the people? This is the part they don't show you in the glossy brochures. A handful of local families had lived on that stretch of coast for generations, their histories woven into the very fabric of the land. Displacing them wasn't just asking them to move houses, it was like tearing a living branch from an ancient tree. This wasn't just development, it was a quiet, creeping form of erasure. The fight for environmental justice here wasn't just about saving trees and turtles, it was about preserving human heritage and fighting for the soul of a community. It's easy for us, on the outside, to judge. But when your roof is leaking and your children are hungry, the promise of a construction job feels less like a threat and more like a lifeline. Conrad knew this. He exploited that desperation, creating a rift in the community. Suddenly, it was no longer just the islanders versus the billionaire. It was neighbor against neighbor, fisherman against farmer, creating the first fractures that would pave the way for a bitter father versus daughter battle that was simmering just beneath the surface, unseen and unfelt by the main players. So the island started to buzz with a nervous energy, a mix of excitement and dread. The promise of jobs hung in the air, sweet but laced with the poison of potential loss. What if the jobs only lasted until the resort was built? What if the fishing grounds were barren in 5 years? These were the whispers that grew louder each day, a gathering of clouds on the horizon. A storm changes everything, and everyone could feel the atmospheric pressure dropping. A sign that the conflict was about to truly ignite. The whole situation was a tinderbox. On one side, you had a billionaire's unshakable vision and a community desperate for economic relief. On the other, the undeniable reality of a fragile ecosystem and the deep roots of ancestral homes. The tension was palpable, a silent scream waiting for a voice. All it needed was a leader, someone with the courage to stand up and shout what everyone else was only daring to whisper. Someone to finally kickstart the real eco-activist versus tycoon showdown. And then she appeared. Not with the thunder of a helicopter, but with the quiet, unshakable force of the tide. Dr. Liana Cruz. She was born of the island, with salt in her veins and the rhythm of the waves in her heart. You could say she was the island's immune response, the antibody created to fight the infection of corporate greed. She wasn't just an activist, she was a scientist with a soul on fire. The moment she stepped forward, the narrative shifted. It was no longer a simple dispute, it became a clear-cut case of eco-activist versus tycoon. Liana didn't fight with just passion, she fought with facts. Wielding her doctorate like a sharpened spear, she could break down complex ecological data into language that stirred the soul. At town meetings, while Conrad's team presented slick charts with questionable projections, Liana would counter with the hard, cold truth about carbon sinks, water table contamination, and biodiversity loss. She was giving a voice to the silent victims, coral, the birds, the very air they breathed. Her battle for environmental justice was built on a foundation of irrefutable science and undeniable love for her home. It wasn't a role she sought. Leadership, for the truest leaders, is never a choice but a calling. One evening, at a gathering, on the beach, she spoke. Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the noise of doubt and fear. She didn't offer easy solutions or false promises. Instead, she offered something far more powerful, a shared purpose. In that moment, watching her, neighbors who had been divided by Conrad's promises began to look at each other again. This was the very beginning of a journey from conflict to connection, a reminder that a common cause can heal the deepest wounds. For Liana, this fight was deeply personal. This was the water she learned to swim in, the forest where Shed identified her. First native orchid. Conrad saw a blank canvas for his resort. She saw a living museum of her entire life. Every tree held a memory, every cove a story. She was fighting for her past as much as for the island's future. It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? She was fighting to protect her roots, completely unaware that those same roots would lead to a lost family. Found in the most tumultuous way imaginable, she was relentless. She organized petitions, launched a social media campaign that went viral, and wrote scathing odes that were picked up by international news outlets. Liana Cruz became a name that buzzed with energy, a symbol of resistance. She was David meticulously, choosing her stones to face Goliath. The father versus daughter battle had officially begun, a war waged in public forums and newspaper headlines, with neither of the generals knowing the true nature of their connection. The battlefield was set, and she was digging the trenches. Her emergence sent ripples all the way to Conrad's temporary headquarters. At first, he dismissed her as a minor nuisance, a passionate local who would eventually run out of steam. He had faced protesters before, but there was something different about this woman. Her arguments were too sharp, her influence growing. Too quickly, he knew he would have to confront her directly. And that first facetto-face encounter was destined to be more than just a debate. It would be a collision of two worlds, and the first spark of a very unknown blood ties revelation. The moment of their first real confrontation was electric. It happened at a tense council meeting, the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Conrad, cool and composed, stood at the podium, a lion in his own corporate jungle. Then, Liana was called to speak. She walked up, not with anger, but with a searing, focused intensity. He really saw her for the first time. The file on his desk had described an obstacle, but the woman before him was a force of nature. The eco-activist versus tycoon showdown was suddenly very, very real. What struck him first wasn't her beauty, but her mind. Wow! She dismantled his company's environmental impact assessment with the precision of a surgeon. She wasn't just emotional, she was brilliant, quoting scientific studies and legal precedents he was sure his own team had overlooked. He built his empire on being the smartest man in the room, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of intellectual challenge. This wasn't just a simple case of nature versus profit, it was a chess match, and he had just met a grandmaster. Then he felt the heat of her passion. It radiated from her, a righteous fire in her eyes that was both infuriating and, to his surprise, captivating. She spoke of the island as if it were a living being, a beloved family member on life support. He, too, was a passionate man. It's a non-negotiable trait for anyone who builds an empire from scratch. And in her fire, he saw a reflection of his own, just pointed in the opposite direction. It was a bizarre, unexpected moment that hinted at a future from conflict to connection. But then, something else hit him. A detail so unexpected it made the air leave his lungs. It was the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the determined set of her jaw when she made a particularly sharp point. It was familiar. Uncannily so. An echo from a lifetime ago. A ghost from a past filled with love and profound guilt. He saw a phantom of a woman named Elena, a woman he had loved on this very island, and his carefully constructed composure began to crack. This was the first whisper of the billionaire's secret daughter. He tried to dismiss it, of course. A trick of the light, a figment of a guilty conscience. Coincidences happen. The island was small, perhaps features repeated themselves in families. But the image was burned into his mind, a nagging splinter he couldn't dislodge. The confrontation had rattled him, not because he feared losing the project, but because she had resurrected a part of his past he thought was long dead and buried. The carefully planned island secrets unveiled by his resort project were suddenly turning inward, exposing his own. He left that meeting a different man. The fight for the island had just become intensely personal, layered with a mystery he felt compelled to solve. Liana Cruz was no longer just his adversary, she was an enigma, a puzzle that connected his present ambitions to his deepest past regrets. He was a man drawn to challenges, and she was the most complex and compelling challenge he had ever faced. Their war was just getting started, but its nature had fundamentally and secretly changed. Liana didn't hold back. In their next public clash, broadcast on a regional news channel, she looked straight into the camera and metaphorically, straight at Conrad, and called his project what she truly believed it was: neocolonialism wrapped in a pretty 5-star package. Oof. She argued he was just another powerful outsider coming to a resourceric land to extract its beauty and soul for the benefit of the wealthy, leaving behind a depleted culture and environment. That accusation lit a match to gasoline, sparking fiery debates across the island and beyond. The battle lines were drawn in the sand, quite literally. Protests, organized by Liana, became a daily occurrence at the proposed construction site. Islanders, joined by international environmental groups, held signs that read, "Our reefs, not your riches, and environmental justice now." It was a powerful visual, a grassroots movement pushing back against a corporate giant. This was the father versus daughter battle in its most public and potent form, a clash of ideologies broadcast for all to see. Even if the familial connection remained a buried secret, Conrad, for his part, went on the offensive. He launched a slick PR campaign, framing Liana as an extremist who was against progress, someone who wanted to keep the island and its people trapped in the past. He gave interviews talking about opportunity and shared prosperity, skillfully painting her as an enemy of the common people. It was a masterclass in corporate spin, turning the eco-activist versus tycoon narrative into a complex drama with no clear hero or villain for the outside world to easily cheer for. But Liana's words had struck a chord. Her accusation of colonial greed resonated with a deep historical wound, not just on this island but in many places like it around the world. It elevated the conflict from a local zoning dispute to a global conversation about ethics, power, and responsibility. She wasn't just fighting for a turtle nesting ground, she was fighting against a pattern of exploitation. This fight for environmental justice was now part of a much larger story. Inside his pristine, air-conditioned office, Conrad found himself watching clips of her speeches over and over. He should have hated her. She was threatening his legacy project, costing him money and turning public opinion against him. And yet he couldn't look away. Her fierce intelligence, the very thing he was battling, was the thing that drew him in. Her conviction was so absolute, so pure. He was witnessing a mirror of his own relentless drive, and it was both infuriating and utterly mesmerizing. The resemblance still haunted him. Every time he saw her on screen, he saw the ghost of Elena, the woman he once loved, the woman he had abandoned. Was it possible? The thought was insane, a plot twist from a cheap novel. But it lodged itself in his mind, a seed of terrifying possibility. The public war raged on, but a secret, internal one had begun within Conrad. A war between his ambition and a dawning, horrifying suspicion about the unknown blood ties that might connect him to his greatest enemy. It's a funny thing about magnets, isn't it? Sometimes, opposite poles don't just attract, they slam into each other with a force that feels like repulsion at first. That was Conrad and Liana. Every public debate was a battlefield, every press release, a volley of cannon fire. He was nature versus profit personified, and she was its fiercest guardian. He should have been focused on crushing her movement, on removing this obstacle. Yet, in the quiet moments after their clashes, he found himself thinking not about her arguments, but about her. He started attending meetings he could have sent a subordinate to, just to be in the same room. It was a strategic folly, a waste of his valuable time, and he knew it. But he was drawn to her like a moth to a flame, even knowing it could burn him. Head watcher, captivated by the way her mind worked, the passion that made her words resonate. With such power, there was an integrity to her he hadn't encountered in years, a purity of purpose that his world of gray morals and calculated risks had all but extinguished. This fascination was, of course, tangled up with the haunting resemblance. He began to look for it, for the ghost of Elena in Liana's expressions. He saw it in her stubborn chin, a trait he remembered so clearly from arguments on a moonlit beach decades ago. He saw it in her eyes, a deep, soulful brown that held both fire and a hint of ancient sadness. The possibility of unknown blood ties was no longer a fleeting thought, it was becoming a quiet obsession, a background process constantly running in his mind. He was a man who solved problems. That's how Head built his empire. A market downturn, a hostile takeover, a supply chain issue were all just complex puzzles to be solved. And Liana was the most complex puzzle of all. He told himself his interest was purely strategic, know your enemy. But he knew it was a lie. He was drawn to her conviction, to the very essence of who she was. This strange pull was the first unconscious step on a long road towards redemption. Their public feud, the father vs. daughter battle playing out on a grand stage, was fueled by this bizarre secret dynamic. His attacks on her became less about her policies and more personal, as if he were testing her, prodding her to see what she was made of. It was a strange, subconscious way of trying to understand her, to connect with her, even through conflict. He was fighting her with one hand while, with the other, he was desperately trying to grasp who she was. And so, he lived a dual existence. In public, he was the ruthless tycoon determined to build his paradise. In private, he was a man haunted by a ghost from his past and captivated by the woman who wore her face. He was completely unaware that this internal conflict was merely the prelude. A single chance discovery was about to turn his world upside down, moving his suspicion from the realm of possibility to the edge of certainty. His nights became restless, haunted by dreams of a time before the billions, before the hardened exterior. The story rewinds not to a boardroom, but to a sun-drenched beach decades earlier. A much younger Conrad, full of ambition but with a heart still open, meets Elena. She wasn't just a woman, she was the spirit of the island itself, willed, gentle, and deeply connected to her home. Theirs was a whirlwind romance, a classic tale of island love reborn in his memory, a love that was as intense and untamed as the landscape around them. He remembers the feeling of sand between his toes, the taste of salt on her skin, the sound of her laughter mixing with the cry of gulls. For a brief summer, he wasn't Conrad Raines, the future tycoon. He was just a young man in love, learning the names of the local flora from a woman who knew the island's every secret. She showed him the delicate balance of the ecosystem he now threatened to destroy. It's a bitter irony, isn't it? The very foundation of his current nature versus profit war was built on a memory of pure, unadulterated love for that same nature. But the world came calling. A business opportunity, a path to the future had always craved, beckoned from overseas. He made promises, of course. "He'll be back," he whispered, a line as old as time itself. He meant it, or at least he told himself. He did. But ambition is a powerful tide, and it pulled him away, further and further, until the island and Elena became a distant, beautiful ache in his memory. He chose his future, and in doing so, he planted the seeds of a profound, lifelong guilt. He remembers her fierce spirit, her unwavering belief in protecting her home. She would have fought him on this resort. Oh, she would have been his greatest adversary. The thought sends a chill down his spine. He sees her face, her passion, her conviction, and it blends seamlessly with the image of Liana in the town hall. The similarities were always there, but now, filtered through the clarity of these memories, they were becoming undeniable. The whispers of unknown blood ties grew into a deafening roar in his mind. These flashbacks weren't just nostalgia, they were a reckoning. He was being forced to confront the man he used to be and the choices he made. He had buried that part of himself under layers of success and ruthlessness, convinced it was a necessary sacrifice. But now, he realized he hadn't just left a woman behind, he had abandoned a piece of his own soul on that island. The quest for redemption always begins with acknowledging the sin, and his was one of heartbreaking abandonment. The past was no longer the past. It was alive, breathing, and staring him in the face at every public meeting. His battle with Liana was no longer just about a resort. It was a confrontation with his own history, with the ghost of a love he had betrayed. He was now primed, his mind a fertile ground of suspicion and memory. All it would take was one more piece of evidence, one small tangible link, to make the impossible seem terrifyingly real. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A local newspaper ran a sympathetic feature on Liana, a day in the life of the woman fighting the billionaire. It was meant to be a puff piece, to humanize her for the public. But for Conrad, it was a lightning bolt. There, on his tablet screen, was a photo of Liana in her modest home, standing beside a bookshelf. And on that bookshelf, in a simple wooden frame, was a faded photograph of a young woman, smiling, with the sun in her eyes. It was Elena. Time stopped. The air in his penthouse suite, usually buzzing with the hum of technology and power, went completely silent. He zoomed in, his hand trembling slightly. There was no doubt. It was her face, the face from his dreams, the face he had tried so hard to forget. The same stubborn chin, the same soulful eyes. The ghost from his past was not a ghost at all. She was real. And she was Liana's mother. The island's secrets unveiled in that single mundane photo were enough to shatter his world. A tsunami of emotions crashed over him: shock, disbelief, and a profound, gut-wrenching guilt that was sharper and more painful than anything he had ever felt. Elena. He had left her. He had left her, and she had been pregnant with his child. His daughter, Liana, his adversary, his fiercest critic. The woman who stood for everything he was trying to tear down was his own flesh and blood. The billionaire's secret daughter wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a fact, staring at him from a 2-inch photo. The irony was staggering, almost cruel. He had returned to the island partly to quiet the ghosts of his past, to build something so monumental it would erase his youthful regrets. Instead, he had flown directly into the heart of his biggest secret. The father versus daughter battle was no longer a metaphor for an ideological clash, it was a literal tragic reality. He was at war with his own child, and she had no idea. The foundation of his entire world had just turned to blood in the sand. His mind raced, replaying every interaction with her. Her passion, her intelligence, her fire. It wasn't just a reflection of his own spirit, it was his spirit. It was Elena's spirit. The unknown blood ties were now known, at least to him, and the knowledge was a crushing weight. What did this mean? What could he possibly do? The conflict was no longer about a resort. It was about a lifetime of lies, a lost family found in the most explosive way imaginable. He sat there for hours, the tablet screen glowing in the dark. The photo of Elena mocking him with her youthful smile. The game had changed. The stakes were no longer financial, they were deeply, terrifyingly personal. He was a man who acted, who made decisive moves. But now he was paralyzed. He needed proof. Not emotional proof from a faded photograph, but cold, hard, scientific certainty. He needed a DNA twist revelation. And he knew he would have to get it no matter the cost. Conrad Rains did not become a billionaire by waiting for things to happen. He made them happen. The shock gave way to a cold, calculated resolve. He needed certainty. Doubt was a luxury he couldn't afford, not now. The next day, he arranged a mediation, a supposed good faith negotiation with Liana and her team. It was a complete sham, of course. The entire meeting, held in a neutral conference room, was a meticulously staged play with only one purpose. It was a grim, necessary step on a path laden with guilt. He was charming, even conciliatory, a performance worthy of an Oscar. He listened intently to her arguments about environmental justice, nodding thoughtfully, playing the part of a man willing to compromise. He offered everyone bottled water, simple, hospitable, and completely strategic. He watched, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs, as Liana took a sip from the glass he had offered her. The whole conversation about nature versus profit faded into a dull buzz in his ears. All he could see was that glass. After the meeting, as his team and hers were still packing their briefcases, he orchestrated a distraction. He had his assistant accidentally spill a stack of papers, drawing everyone's attention for a few crucial seconds. In that moment, Conrad, with a sleight of hand a magician would envy, pocketed the glass Liana had used. He slipped it into a prelabeled biohazard bag inside his briefcase. It was a profound violation of her privacy, a deeply unethical act. But to him, it was the only way to uncover the truth of their unknown blood ties. He overnighted the package to a private, outrageously expensive lab in Switzerland, a place that guaranteed two things: speed and absolute discretion. The instructions were simple: extract DNA from the residue on the glass and compare it to the sample he provided, his own. The waiting began, and it was a unique form of torture. Every hour that passed was an agony of suspense. He was on the verge of the ultimate DNA, a twist revelation, one that could either confirm his hope or validate his deepest fear. He tried to work, to focus on the resort, the business, the empire, but it was impossible. The face of Liana, so full of fire and conviction, was superimposed over everything. He imagined the moment the results would come in. An email, a secure file, a simple match or no match. Two words that would redefine his entire existence. The father versus daughter battle was on a temporary ceasefire, replaced by an internal war. Within his own soul, was he hoping for a match or dreading it? He honestly didn't know. This single covert act set in motion a chain of events that could not be stopped. He was searching for a secret, but what he didn't realize was that the truth, once unleashed, has a life of its own. It doesn't care about timing or consequences. He thought he was seeking control, seeking to manage the island's secrets unveiled. But in reality, He had just lit the fuse on a bomb, and he was standing right next to it, waiting for the explosion. The email arrived at 2:17 a.m. A simple, sterile notification: your results are ready for secure download. Conrad had been awake all night, staring at the city lights from his penthouse, a glass of untouched whiskey sweating on the table beside him. His hands were steady as he navigated the encrypted portal, but his heart was a chaotic drum solo. He opened the file. There were no dramatic phrases, just columns of data, genetic markers, and a single stark conclusion at the bottom: probability of paternity, 99,999. It wasn't a shock, not really. He had known, hadn't he? From the moment he saw that photograph. He had known it in his bones. But seeing it there, in the cold, irrefutable language of science, made it real. The DNA twist revelation was complete. Liana Cruz, the fiery eco-warrior, the thorn in his side, the leader of the opposition, was his daughter. A wave of something vast and unnameable washed over him, a dizzying cocktail of terror, wonder, regret, and a strange, fierce pride. He had a daughter. A lost family found. He leaned back in his chair, the city lights blurring through a sudden film of moisture in his eyes. He, Conrad Rains, the man who controlled everything, had fathered a child he never knew, a child who had grown into a woman who was, in every way, his equal and his opposite. The billionaire's secret daughter was no longer a secret to him, but the knowledge was a cage. He thought of her, fighting for her island, her home, with a passion that was so clearly his own. It was his legacy, alive and breathing, and it was trying to destroy him. The entire eco-activist versus tycoon conflict was instantly reframed. It wasn't a business dispute anymore. It was a family tragedy. A Resort Sparks family war had become a devastatingly literal headline in the story of his life. Every harsh word he had said about her, every dismissive PR statement his team had released, now felt like an act of self-mutilation. He had been fighting his own blood. The irony was a poison seeping into every corner of his soul. He felt the crushing weight of his past decisions, leaving Elena, never looking back. The decades of silence. His ambition had cost him a family. It had cost him the chance to see his own daughter grow up. The guilt was no longer a dull ache, it was a physical, searing pain. He had returned to this island to build a monument to his success, and instead, he had unearthed the ruins of his greatest failure as a man. Now what? The question hammered at him. What does a father do when he discovers his daughter is his greatest enemy, and she doesn't even know his name? To reveal the truth now, in the heat of their public battle, would seem like a tactic, a manipulative, strategic move to disarm her. It could destroy her. Her identity, her cause, everything she believed in was built on the foundation of being an islander fighting the outsider. And he was that outsider. The connection he craved could be the very thing that broke her. The 99.99 confirmation didn't bring clarity, it brought chaos. Conrad, a man defined by decisive action, was paralyzed. He would pace his suite for hours, replaying the entire saga in his mind. The knowledge of being her father was a secret that burned. Every time he saw her on the news, her face filled with righteous anger directed at him. It felt like a dagger twisting in his gut. The guilt was a relentless beast, feeding on his decades of ignorance and selfishness. He had missed her whole life. Her first steps, her first words, every scraped knee and proud achievement. The central question became a torturous loop to tell her, or not to tell her. If he revealed the billionaire's secret daughter truth, what would happen? Would she see it as a desperate ploy from the eco-activist versus tycoon conflict? A twisted attempt to win the war by blowing up the battlefield? He could just hear her accusation that he was using this profound, life-altering secret as another weapon in his corporate arsenal. The thought of her looking at him with even more contempt than she already did was unbearable. On the other hand, could he live with this secret? Continuing the father versus daughter battle, knowing the truth felt monstrous. He would be actively trying to ruin the life's work of his own child, crushing the spirit he now recognized as a shared inheritance. The path to redemption seemed to demand honesty, no matter how painful. Didn't she deserve to know who her father was? Didn't he, after all this time, owe her the truth, regardless of the consequences? It was a paradox with no clean answer. He imagined the scene. "Liana, I am your father." It sounded like a line from a ridiculous space opera. How could a conversation even begin when its foundation was a lie of omission spanning her entire lifetime? He feared the revelation wouldn't bring them from conflict to connection. He feared it would utterly destroy her. Her identity was so deeply tied to her mother and the island. To learn her father was the very man threatening everything she held dear, it could shatter her sense of self, poisoning her past and derailing her future. The resort, the whole nature versus profit enterprise that had once been the center of his universe, now felt like a foolish, hollow ambition. What was the point of building a legacy if it meant alienating the only legacy that truly mattered? His obsession with building paradise had led him to the brink of destroying his own family. The island's secrets unveiled had turned his dream project into a nightmare of his own making, and so he did nothing. He was frozen, trapped in a web of his own making. He continued the public fight, his heart no longer in it, his words feeling like ash in his mouth. He was a general commanding an army in a war he no longer believed in, against an enemy he secretly loved. He knew a breaking point was coming. The pressure was building, both in his own soul and in the public arena. Something had to give. The stage was set for a final explosive confrontation. The final public hearing was the island's Super Bowl. The room was packed, cameras were rolling, and the air crackled with anticipation. This was supposed to be the final word before the permits were either granted or denied. For Liana, this was its last stand to protect her home. She came prepared, armed with data, legal arguments, and a passion that seemed to burn brighter than ever. She was fighting for environmental justice, and she was not going to lose. For Conrad, this hearing was pure torture. He had to stand there and advocate for a project that now felt like a monument to his own arrogance. He had to publicly discredit the arguments of his own daughter. Every word of his prepared speech felt like a lie. The father versus daughter battle had reached its terrible climax, a spectacle for the world to watch, while the true tragedy remained his secret alone. He looked at her, so fierce and alive, and felt a wave of profound guilt. Liana delivered a breathtaking speech. She didn't just talk about the ecosystem, she spoke about heritage, identity, and the soul of a place. She spoke of blood in the sand, accusing Conrad's project of demanding a sacrifice the island could not afford to make. Her voice never wavered. She was magnificent. And with every powerful word she spoke against him, Conrad felt a mixture of agonizing pain and fierce secret pride. That's my daughter, he thought. Then it was his turn. Everyone expected him to come out swinging, to dismantle her arguments with his trademark ruthless logic, and he tried. He spoke of economics, of opportunity, of the future. But his heart wasn't in it. His eyes kept finding hers in the crowd, and the carefully constructed wall between Conrad the tycoon and Conrad. The father began to crumble. He was losing the nature versus profit debate because, for the first time, he was starting to see the true value of what he was trying to take. Neither would yield an inch. Liana, fueled by righteous conviction, and Conrad, trapped by his public role in private torment, held their ground. The hearing devolved into a tense, direct confrontation between the two of them. It was raw, personal, and utterly captivating. To the spectators, it was the ultimate eco-activist versus tycoon showdown. To Conrad, it was an unbearable family feud, playing out under the glare of public scrutiny. He wanted to scream, to stop it all, but he was powerless. The hearing ended in a stalemate, with more questions than answers and tensions at an all-time high. The community was more divided than ever. Conrad and Liana left without speaking, both drained and resolute. The air on the island felt heavy, charged, as if the human conflict was mirroring a pressure drop in the atmosphere itself. They had reached the point of no return. The conflict couldn't be solved with words anymore. It was going to take an act of God, a force of nature, to change their collision course. A storm changes everything. It started as a whisper on the Weather Channel, a tropical depression far out at sea. But within 48 hours, it had a name and a trajectory pointed directly at them: Hurricane Isla, a monster Category 4 storm. Suddenly, the debate over the resort, the fight over nature versus profit, seemed laughably insignificant. The abstract threat of environmental damage was replaced by the immediate, terrifying certainty of wind, waves, and destruction: the storm. Changes everything was no longer a metaphor, it was a terrifying reality. The island's emergency infrastructure was minimal, wholly unprepared for a storm of this magnitude. Panic began to set in. This was no longer a matter of debate, it was a matter of survival. And in the chaos, two leaders emerged, the two people who had been commanding the island's attention for months: Conrad and Liana. Their war was instantly put on indefinite hold. The only battle that mattered now was against the clock and the coming storm. Conrad, for the first time, used his immense resources not for profit, but for people. He diverted his own supply helicopters, intended for construction materials, to begin evacuating the most vulnerable residents from low-lying areas. He used his logistical genius not to plan a resort, but to set up emergency shelters in the most fortified buildings. He barked orders, coordinated with the island authorities, and moved with a purpose that had nothing to do with money. The father versus daughter battle was forgotten, replaced by a desperate mission to save lives. Liana, using her intimate knowledge of the island and the trust she earned from the locals, became the on-the-ground commander. She knew which families were isolated, which elders were too stubborn to leave their homes, which paths would be the first to flood. She worked side by side with Conrad's team, her fierce adversary from yesterday, now her unlikely partner. They didn't speak of their conflict. There was no time. There was only the shared, urgent goal of getting everyone to safety. It was the first, unexpected step from conflict to connection. They worked through the day and into the night, the wind howling louder with each passing hour. In a moment of frenzied activity, coordinating the boarding of a helicopter, their hands brushed. They both froze for a split second, a jolt of unexpected electricity passing between them. They looked at each other, not as adversaries, but as two people bound by a terrible, shared responsibility. For Liana, it was a moment of confusing respect. For Conrad, it was a moment of heartbreaking love and profound guilt. As the first bands of the hurricane began to lash the shore, they found themselves huddled together in the main shelter, a concrete schoolhouse. The power was out, the wind screamed like a banshee, and the fate of their island hung in the balance. The war was over. The fight was over. All that was left were two people, a shared secret, and the terrifying, cleansing power of the storm. As the hurricane raged, stripping leaves from trees and turning the sky into a churning gray vortex, the world was reduced to the four walls of the storm shelter. The corporate tycoon, the enemy, ceased to exist. In his place was a man named Conrad, who was everywhere at once. Liana watched, initially with suspicion, then with grudging admiration, as he moved through the crowded room. He wasn't hiding in a corner, he was on the front lines. He was a natural leader, and for the first time, she was seeing that leadership. Used not for gain, but for good. He was with a group of terrified children, using the flashlight from his ridiculously expensive phone to make shadow puppets on the wall, coaxing laughter out of them. He was using his jacket to cushion an elderly woman's head. He personally checked the building's structural supports, his face a mask of intense concentration. Liana saw a side of him she never could have imagined. This wasn't the greedy developer from her speeches. This was a man deeply concerned with the welfare of the people around him. It completely scrambled her eco-activist versus tycoon narrative. There was a moment when a section of the roof groaned under a particularly violent gust, and a wave of panic swept the room. Before anyone else could react, Conrad's voice boomed through the space, calm and authoritative. He reassured everyone, directed a few men to brace a weak spot, and radiated a confidence that was undeniably contagious. Liana realized with a jolt that she, along with everyone else, was looking to him for guidance. She was relying on her sworn enemy, and he was not failing them. This wasn't about his resort or his profits. His concern felt genuine, raw. She saw it in his eyes when he listened to a fisherman's fears about his boat. Empathy was real. This chaotic, terrifying night was stripping away the layers of their public personas, revealing the people underneath. The journey from conflict to connection was accelerating at warp speed, fueled by the adrenaline of survival and the shared vulnerability in the face of nature's immense power. She found herself working with him, a natural rhythm developing between them. Head identify a problem, and she'd know the local solution. Head secure a resource, and she'd know who needed it most. The father versus daughter battle felt like a story from another lifetime. Here, in the heart of the storm, they were simply a team. She caught herself watching him, trying to reconcile the monster she had created in her mind with the competent, caring man working beside her. The storm was a great equalizer. It didn't care about bank accounts or ideologies. It demanded resilience, courage, and community. In the eye of the hurricane, Liana saw that Conrad possessed these qualities in abundance. The hatred she had nurtured for him began to curdle, transforming into something far more complicated and confusing. The foundation of her convictions was shaken. The man she thought she knew was a stranger, and the stranger was someone she might be able to respect. The dawn broke to a surreal silence, the hurricane's roar replaced by the drip of water and the distant cry of a displaced bird. The world was washed clean and broken. As Liana and Conrad stepped out of the shelter, the devastation was breathtaking. Ancient trees were snapped like twigs, homes were reduced to splinters, and the pristine beach was a tangle of debris. In the face of such total destruction, their old conflict felt not just small, but utterly meaningless. The resort was a ghost of a dead dream. They stood there for a moment, side by side, surveying the wreckage of the island and, metaphorically, the wreckage of their war. This was it. Conrad knew with absolute certainty that there would never be a better or more necessary moment. The pretense was gone, washed away by the storm. All that was left was the raw, broken truth. His quest for redemption had to begin now in the ruins. He turned to her, his face etched with an exhaustion that went far beyond a single sleepless night. "Liana," he began, his voice raspy. "There's something I have to tell you." He didn't wait for her to respond. The words just came tumbling out, a torrent of confession held back for decades. He told her about her mother, Elena, about their whirlwind island love reborn so many years ago. He spoke of his youthful ambition, his stupid selfish choice to leave, and the guilt that had been his silent companion ever since. Liana stood frozen, her mind struggling to process his words. It felt like a dream, a story completely disconnected from reality. She listened, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a dawning, shattering understanding. He told her about seeing her photo, the impossible flicker of recognition, the haunting familiarity in her eyes. He confessed to the secret. DNA test, the ultimate DNA twist revelation, not as a justification, but as a desperate act of a man needing to know the truth. "I am your father, Liana," he said finally, the words hanging in the clean, damp air between them. It wasn't a claim of ownership, it was a plea. A statement of fact that explained everything and nothing at all. He had finally revealed the billionaire's secret daughter, and the secret was now hers to carry. He told her he hadn't known that he had spent his life chasing a ghost, only to find her leading the charge against him. The island's secrets unveiled were now complete, laid bare at her feet. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for understanding. He just told her his story, his voice thick with a pain she had never heard before. He confessed everything, holding nothing back. The confession was an act of surrender. He had lost the war, the resort, and his pride. But in the rubble of the hurricane, by finally telling the truth, he was taking the first terrifying step toward finding the one thing he had truly lost: his family. The silence that followed Conrad's confession was heavier than the storm itself. Liana didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just stood there, the entire history of her life rewriting itself in her mind. Her father. This man, this enemy, was her father. The father versus daughter battle had been a lie because one of its combatants never knew the stakes. But in the shared devastation, in the raw honesty of his confession, a tiny, fragile seed of something new began to sprout. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something more fundamental, a shared starting point. The first step was rebuilding. Not their relationship, but the island. The work was grueling, but it was a necessary distraction, a way to channel their shattered emotions into something productive. Conrad officially and publicly canceled the resort project. He then pledged his personal fortune not to building a luxury paradise, but to restoring the real one. He funded the rebuilding of homes, the replanting of native trees, and the restoration of the damaged reef. His fight was no longer nature versus profit, it was a quiet, desperate attempt to heal the wounds he had helped create. Liana, the island's fierce protector, became its chief architect of recovery. She worked with Conrad, her newfound knowledge of his identity a constant buzzing presence in her mind. Their conversations were stilted at first, focused only on logistics, lumber, water purification, medical supplies. But slowly, tentatively, the wall between them began to crumble. She saw his guilt not in his words, but in his actions. He worked tirelessly, never asking for thanks, driven by a need to earn a redemption he wasn't sure he deserved. The journey from conflict to connection wasn't a sudden leap, it was a slow, painful process of laying one brick at a time. One day, while clearing debris from the old beach where he had first met Elena, he shared a story about her. Liana listened, silent, absorbing a piece of her mother and herself that she had never known. It was a small moment, but it was the beginning of them finding their lost family found. Not in a grand reunion, but in the shared quiet of rebuilding. They were a strange team, the billionaire's secret daughter and the father who'd almost destroyed her world, but together, they were a powerful force for good. They established a foundation for sustainable development, ensuring the island's economy could grow without sacrificing its Sula true victory for environmental justice. They were building more than just houses, they were laying a new foundation for the island's future, one based on respect and balance. Their story doesn't end with a perfect, happy family. It ends with a beginning. The scars remained on the landscape and in their hearts. But as they stood on the restored beach, watching the sunset, they were no longer just adversaries or strangers. They were a father and a daughter, bound by blood in the sand and a shared love for the island that had torn them apart and, ultimately, brought them back together. They were rebuilding a family, one difficult, hopeful day at a time. And so, from the literal and metaphorical wreckage, something new began to grow. The story of Conrad and Liana started as a simple father versus daughter battle, hidden under the guise of nature versus profit. But it became a powerful testament to the fact that sometimes, the greatest storms aren't the ones on the weather maps, but the ones raging inside our own families. It shows us that true redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about using its broken pieces to build a better future. Their journey from conflict to connection is a messy, complicated, and beautiful reminder that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. Now we have to turn it over to you. What a journey, right? We're dying to know what you think. What was the one moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Was it the quiet, unethical DN, a twist revelation from a simple water glass? Or the raw, vulnerable confession after the hurricane? Let us know in the comments below. And be honest, did you expect a different ending? Part of you might have wanted Liana to never forgive him, to remain the fierce eco-activist versus tycoon warrior to the very end. Or did you love the hopeful, realistic outcome of a lost family found, choosing to start over? If you enjoyed watching these island secrets unveiled as much as we enjoyed telling this story, please show your support by giving this video a like. It truly helps the channel more than you know. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that follow button and turn on notifications. We have so many more incredible stories coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one.